Imagine expanding your team's abilities without adding headcount. At Element 451, AI assistants like admissions advisors and student success coaches work alongside your staff to deliver personalized experiences at scale, offer round-the-clock support, and uncover data-driven insights. It's not just about doing more, it's about doing it smarter. Elevate your team with an AI workforce that delivers personalized, scalable, and impactful experiences across the student lifecycle. Learn more at element451.com. Hi, I'm a higher ed CMO, and I have a confession to make. I think one of the biggest challenges that face higher ed marketing leaders and strategists is figuring out how to maximize the creativity and talent of graphic designers and art directors and creative directors. And I see over and over again these absolutely amazing professionals siloed away and not necessarily brought in early enough on projects and not necessarily allowed to give their best to every project. And so when Brittney Westbrook posted a flowchart showing how to work with designers in higher education, I thought immediately, I need to have her on the show. Brittney Westbrook is a strategic communications leader whose experience spans marketing, public relations, branding, and creative. She is the senior marketing officer at the University of Southern Mississippi, where she leads the high-profile marketing communications initiatives. She plays a pivotal role in helping tell the university's best stories and shaping the brand, and she also serves as the associate director of university communications. She has degrees in graphic design and public relations, and she really loves giving back to the next generation of communicators. And I'm thrilled to have her on the show where she's going to share some of the best practices that she has for working with creatives. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, a podcast that empowers higher ed marketers to bring innovation, creativity, and excellence to their work. I'm your host, Jaime Hunt. Join me every 2 weeks for discussions with some of the best minds in higher education marketing. Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher educational professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. I'm so delighted to be here with Brittney, and we're going to be talking a little bit about creativity and managing creative people and working with designers. But Brittney, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited. And what kind of sparked this conversation was a week or so ago, Brittney posted a infographic sort of like flowchart that was explaining how to successfully work with a graphic designer. And I was like, there's a story here. I want to hear more about it. And I think this is an issue that a lot of people have in higher education and beyond, working with creatives and figuring out that balance between creative direction and autonomy and all of that. And so I can't think of anybody better to have this conversation than Brittney because she's very, very talented. But to start off, what sparked creating that chart? And actually tell us a little bit more about the chart. I was a little vague there.
Yeah, so it's kind of a flow chart, but it was created actually created it several years ago. I just posted it recently on LinkedIn for the first time, but I created it several years ago for a conference presentation. And I created it really as like a lighthearted framework just for like discussing some of the challenges and misunderstandings that can arise when you're working with a graphic designer.
So tell me what's in the flow chart. Like, I know it's one of those, like, if it's yes, then you flow here. And if no, flow here. Can you tell us a little bit about what's in it?
Right. So it starts at some things that you should think about before you even sort of engage the designer. And then it kind of takes you down to making sure you're getting your content to them on time. And if you don't, knowing that their schedule will be pushed back. And then all the way to like, okay, you have something back from the designer to review. What do I do if I like it? What do I do if I don't like it? And it kind of takes you through. It's definitely not a very super literal, this is how the process will always go. But again, just a lighthearted way to kind of show you some things that you may not be expecting that will kind of occur throughout that whole process.
Can you tell me a little bit about what some of those things might be?
So things like the designer may say if they give it back to you and you're not happy with it. So what do you do? So it kind of goes into like things to think about. So is it that it's not your favorite shade of blue and that matters, or maybe it doesn't? So there's things, it just kind of walks you through like what you would do if you really, it does not hit the mark at all. So how do you reframe that conversation with the designer, which, we can kind of talk about what that looks like more in depth, but kind of at what point do we regroup and say, I need to go back to the beginning of this whole process, which I think is sort of the twist of the flow chart, that at some point after a couple of rounds, you got to go back to the beginning and say, what are our goals? Who's our audience? And reevaluate that. And if you've communicated that, which is really the kind of the crux of it all, that you don't want to spin your wheels, spin your wheels, spin your wheels. It also talks about things like getting input from other people. Maybe you just don't like it and everyone else thinks it does. So there's some value in that. So kind of walks you through those things.
I loved the part that you had where you asked, does it meet the communications objectives and all the defined parameters? And it's like, if it's yes, then like you're done. Thank your designer. I loved the thank your designer piece. And no, like ask questions. And then you had be specific with feedback. And that to me was like, I know all of us have been in situations where feedback has been like, I just don't like it, or I just want something different. And we've all been in that situation where we've gotten feedback that's vague, just, I just don't like this, or can you just tweak this and change this, or give me something different? I don't know what's different that I want. And I think the idea of being specific with that feedback is really, really important.
Absolutely. I encourage people to be as specific as possible. And sometimes it's hard to put your finger on, what about this isn't working? But the more specific you can be with what that maybe issue is, maybe where you haven't hit the mark, the better the designer can take that and kind of get it where it needs to be. But it's also about asking yourself, ooh, does this not meet my personal aesthetic? Well, you're not going to hang this in your home, so it doesn't matter. But does this meet the goal? So
I, I love the thing that you said about, are you going to hang this in your home? Reminds me of early in my career. I remember our designer created this gorgeous view book, right? Like it looked like some sort of catalog for an art museum or something. And I remember the admissions director was like, this is great if we were hanging it in the Guggenheim. This isn't meeting our marketing objectives. Like it's beautiful, but the calls to action are like in 9-point font and stuff like that. So I love that you mentioned that hanging it up on your wall thing.
yes, yeah, it's got to be functional and do what it needs to do.
For sure. So what do you think non-designers need to understand most about working with designers?
First and foremost, designers are communicators, and I mean good professional graphic designers. Now there are lots of tools where anyone can sort of do some design things, and that's great. But when you are working with a real graphic designer who's been trained in that, realizing that they're not just someone who knows how to use some software, they are communicators. So if you're also a communicator, that's great because you've got two communicators there working together. So they're not decorators. They're not just there to make things look pretty. They're there to help you effectively communicate a message. So remembering that can help. The designer is doing a lot, a good designer is doing a lot of things behind the scenes with technical details, and they're handling a lot of things that you won't ever even know about to make sure that your project is functional and polished and professional. They're also doing things, again, that you won't know about, working to overcome challenges. So maybe there's like a photo that's a must, but it's not really the best photo for this piece. But it's a must, got to be in there. They're doing things to crop it just so, or put text in the right place, or edit it to make it work. So they're putting in that effort to make maybe some things that are less than ideal really just work seamlessly. Also knowing that it's a process, much like the flow chart, that was kind of the point too. Like this is a whole process. It's most likely not going to be, we have a little meeting today and it's a one and done completed file in your inbox tomorrow. It's going to take time to collaborate and iterate and get that where you need to go.
I would love to talk a little bit more about that creative brief because I've worked with some really talented designers. Right off the top of my head, I'm thinking of Michael Mattingly when I was at Miami, where I could give him almost total creative freedom. He had worked at the university for 35 years or something like that. He understood the brand down to his bones. He lived and breathed Miami University. He knew sort of the parameters of what he could and couldn't do from a level of creativity that the president would like. I often put him on presidential projects because he knew and understood the president. And so I could give him really broad strokes for a creative brief. But then some designers that are maybe either new to the organization or they're newer in their career or they don't quite have that level of deep understanding of what the client or the campus partner or whatever you're calling them wants and needs. How do you create a creative brief that gets them there without kind of taking away their autonomy and some of that creative freedom?
So I think first of all, for maybe the marketing leader who's working with the designer, the word creative brief could be scary if you haven't been in an environment where that's something that you've done before. So I just also want to say it doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be elaborate. In fact, like when you're talking about like a literal brief, like a written statement, kind of what we're looking for. In most higher ed environments, you're not going to have time for an elaborate brief. So a well-organized email that outlines all the key details, and then you have maybe a short meeting after that to let the designers ask questions, maybe get clarification on anything, ensure everyone's in alignment. That can go a long way. So things that you want to include in that email, though, for sure, you always want to get these things down on paper. Things that are just obvious. It's not scary. So things like the timeline. So if you're talking about it today, when does this thing have to see the light of day? When does it have to be in front of the audience? And what are all the steps it's going to take to get there? So you got to have a timeline. And you can build in things like, I'm going to have this thing to the designer by this date, or they're going to have back a first draft to me by this date. You can build it in as detailed as you want, but you got to have some sort of timeline. A budget. So maybe there's, some sort of the cost breakdowns could be in all kind of different ways, but knowing if you have a budget and what that is to get this done, got to have that. What are all the deliverables? So, is it a whole suite of things? Is it one thing we're talking about? Is it we're starting with one thing and maybe it's going to evolve into a suite of things? All of that is important to know who the audience is. So, who is going to be looking at this and this needs to make an impact on? And then things like required content. So, if you're like, this logo has to be on here, we need to know that. If this image has to be on here, need to know that. It's basic things, but those things are really, really important and you can't skip that. And think through, the project. If you're the one requesting the project or you're kind of initiating this, think through that before you share that brief. Don't skimp on your time spent on that. The worst thing to do is to not think through it fully and then there's surprises later, or to try to say, oh, it won't matter. I'll give you an example. So in higher ed, the annual reports are done frequently. So let's say someone goes to a designer with an annual report need. The designer's going to immediately say things like, oh, is this something you have a budget that you want to get printed and it's going to be like a multi-page booklet? I mean, these could be long, right? Or is this something that you want to put as a PDF online? Or is this something you're going to want to upload some other way or send out in an email? Sometimes people may see things like, oh, I'm not really sure. Let's just get started and we'll figure that out later. Well, red flag, red flag. Those things are handled very, very differently depending on how that end result, how that deliverable is going to look. And so if you kind of refuse to figure that out on the front end, the designer is just going to decide something for you. And what that could result in is that you get weeks down the road and now there's a lot more. It's going to take a lot longer to get it back where it needs to be if the designer didn't guess right. So really figuring that out up front will save everyone a lot of frustration.
That's so true. And I every place that I have been, I've felt that there's this anxiety and pushback on using creative briefs. So when you brought up, like, it doesn't have to be that hard, you don't have to be scared of it, like, that really resonated with me because it's felt like people are like, that's just one more step that I have to do. And it's intimidating. And one thing that I'm going to share that hopefully will potentially save people time is that if you have something that's going to have a lot of products under it, so I'm going to say, for example, like your undergraduate admissions campaign. We had an overarching creative brief for the whole campaign. So this is the tone, this is the visuals, this is the fill in the blank for the overarching campaign. And then individual pieces, we were able to have more, I would say, brief creative briefs that had like some of those other details about the specificity for those individual pieces. But you didn't have to recreate the wheel for every single piece when you're talking about like the overarching creative direction. So we had those for undergraduate recruitment. We had them for graduate recruitment, advancement, influencing and engaging, stuff like that. So that there was obviously the overarching brand, but sub looks within those for different audiences. And we didn't have a different creative brief for every single piece that was produced. It was like kind of in this umbrella. And that ended up taking away that like that fear factor or that anxiety factor and the time factor to recreate that for every single one. You could just direct to see the overarching creative brief, and then annually, or whatever time frame that made sense for whatever the overarching brief was for, we would revisit those and be like, does this make sense? Is it time for a new twist on the look, or is it time for a new twist on the voice, or how is this working? But I think that's one way to think about saving time. But I thought maybe I was the only person that encountered that anxiety around creative briefs.
And what you're saying about that being created, if you're working with a good design team, they're probably doing that for you if you're not giving that to them. And there are cases where you come with a lot of specificity and you're saying, okay, I really need it like this. And there's times that you don't. It's kind of nice when people don't have too much of that, but maybe kind of know some direction. And so it may be that the design team has that because they're creating suites of things and they don't want to start from scratch. And how in the world can it match the rest of the suite if they're not doing that? So, yeah, some of that gets even done and you don't even know about it because they're that good.
Well, and if you're working with a team with multiple designers, having something like that really helps if somebody else needs to pick up another part of that project. So maybe this person was working on the view book, but this person's going to have to pick up the travel piece. And you can't have a totally different look and feel, even if it's still within the brand. They need to be harmonious. Having a great art director where all the folks kind of report up to can really help with that, but not everybody has that luxury. And I guess that kind of spins me to another question, which is, do you think having an art director is helpful for a team of designers? I mean, do you think that that's something that the CMO or the director of marketing can handle, or do you think like having an art director that's dedicated to like seeing that vision and expanding it out over the team is important?
Having someone who can see that is definitely helpful. But I would say, if you have, especially if you have someone in a leadership role who can kind of dual that and kind of keep one eye on things as maybe you're reviewing anyway and saying, oh, maybe we got too far outside of the brief here or the standard or the look here, whatever. I think that's helpful. But it could also be maybe a senior level designer who could do that, who can review and maybe more like a peer review. Or you could have, if you're having a team of designers, you could have maybe 2 or 3 get together and look at things and kind of bring it together and say, does this kind of still match? Because it is easy to get splintered off into different directions and different people work on things and over time. Absolutely. So I think if you can work that into a higher level position, I think that's probably the most helpful. But if not, identifying someone or someone's tasking people in some way to keep an eye on that is the only way to ensure that you don't kind of go all over the place with it.
Want to create an AI workforce for your institution? Learn how to design AI agents for advising, data analysis, and student engagement at the AI Engage Summit. This free virtual event in February will equip you to manage complex, multi-step workflows across departments. Register now at enrollify.org/engage.
I had such a talented creative director at Miami. He had worked, I think, for like Virgin Airlines and Johnny Walker and, stuff like that. He was so, so talented. And it was really fun watching him work with some of the newer designers to kind of help them improve their skill set or to think through some of the design pieces. And I feel really fortunate that I got to watch them grow and blossom and gain new skills. And it's such a valuable position to have if you can. And I'm curious from your perspective, he was a designer who was really coaching fellow designers. But for people who maybe aren't designers, what is the right way to give feedback that doesn't stifle their creativity or make them feel like, I've heard this before, you're not a designer, you don't know. Like, how can you give feedback that actually is actionable?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge that I think it can be intimidating to give feedback in a creative environment to anyone else, and you don't know how they're going to take it. Maybe you're wrong, or you just don't know. I know when I first started reviewing things, and I came from a creative background, but when I first started doing that, it was more of almost a peer to peer situation. It was intimidating because I was like, oh, what are the right words? They've put effort into this. And maybe, 90% of it's great, but over here, maybe I think we've missed a mark. Maybe it's just my opinion. How do I get my personal opinion out of the way? There's a lot that goes through your mind. But I would say first, identify what you think is most successful. So if you're looking at design work, what is most successful about this design? Back to those objectives. Okay, we said this was maybe the style. Say it's part of a suite of things. Does it match the suite? Or does this speak to the audience? Or is the information presented in a way that's clear and easy to understand? So figure out what's successful. Don't skip that part because that's going to make you feel better because you can come in with something positive first and make the designer feel better. Also, you don't want them to delete that later in the process and you loved it. And now you're like, where did that go? So learn my lesson there. Tell them the part that you love. Then just be direct about what is not working. They are professionals. They can take it. So you don't have to be mean, but you can be direct. You don't have to beat around the bush. And the best thing to do is to explain why you think something's not working. Oh, you picked this font. I don't know if it's conveying the right message because of this. And you don't even have to get that specific if you can't. Maybe you don't have the vocabulary for that. Overall, this event is supposed to be super fun and this feels very formal. So whatever you can do to kind of explain why. And again, thinking back to the objective, keeping yourself in line, going, well, am I saying things that, match what we have said? What are those parameters? What are those objectives? And then as much as possible, you don't have to approach your feedback as a series of demands. You don't have to be like bullet, 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 change this, 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 this. It can be a discussion. You can ask questions. You can say, oh, why'd you maybe do it like this? You will probably learn something. And so you kind of approach it that way, kind of take some of the edge off, ask questions. And you don't have to say, oh, move this here, 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 and move that there. Chances are you're not going to like that. No one's going to like that. You don't have to fix all the problems for them. You can kind of just explain maybe what some of the issues are and let them, they're professionals, let them figure out the best way to solve that for you.
I love that you keep reinforcing that they're professionals because I feel like sometimes I've worked with other leaders, like leaders who are clients, who are like, don't seem to treat the designers as though they have professional expertise or they're not trained in a discipline or they don't understand. And I love that you keep reinforcing that because I think it's so easy to think about designers as just the folks who make things pretty. And my husband's been a graphic designer, an art director, now a creative director, slept next to a creative director for the past 30, oh my gosh, I'm not that old, 26 years. This has been hounded into me that there's a lot of thought and effort that goes into the decisions that a designer makes, and asking, why did you choose to do it this way in a way that's not confrontational can be really an educational moment for you and potentially be like, oh, okay, I get that. And then you can file that away as something you want to propose for the next project.
Absolutely.
I love that. How do you suggest working with a designer who's feeling creatively balked or overwhelmed by the volume of projects and maybe their work isn't as creative as it used to be, or they're feeling like, I don't have it in me to produce exactly what you're looking for, and they're feeling discouraged?
I think sometimes when you sit down, just like someone who's sitting down to write and they have that blank screen, that blank piece of paper, it's the same way. Like, you may open a program, it's just blank. It's just nothing, no pixels are looking back at you. Everything's turned off. it's a blank canvas and you've got to fill it. And so that can be intimidating, especially if you're going kind of getting started on like a really big project. And so, even sitting down and you try to sketch or think through things, you're just like, none of these ideas are new or fresh or hitting or whatever. And so I think that a little bit of inspiration can go a long way. And I think the kind of further along you get in your career, you forget, because when you're a student, they're constantly encouraging you, go look at other work, go look at other work, go look at other work. And so even we don't always have the luxury to spend oodles of time, drinking coffee and thinking about ideas before you get started. Sometimes you just have to jump right in. You got to get this done. But even things just like a quick Google search, you'll see good things, you'll see bad things, but it can spark that whole new idea. And so that's an easy one I think we forget. That's the easy way to just go look at some things. But also starting small, like really small. So like plugging in, opening a document and saying, I don't have to finish this right now. I don't even have to make good progress. I'm going to open the file in the program I need to work in. I'm going to add maybe the essential elements. I know these logos have to be on there, these photos. Maybe you add the copy, but you don't format it. And you're like, I'm going to save the file and I'm going to put it in the right folder. I'm not going to let it hang out on my desktop. And you do all those things. Often that will make you'll start having ideas and you'll start working on it. You may even do the whole thing. And so it gets you going. I actually use this for writing projects as well. And I use it for like putting up laundry, all kind of things. This can work just to get yourself started. Promise to yourself that you're going to start, you're going to make the file and see if that gets you going. And then another thing, I think just like this is really for the leaders to know, the creative work can't be done in a huge rush. So you have to help protect the time of the people who are doing the creative work. And so they can't be in meetings all day and creating things. They can't be constantly interrupted and creating things. And so we all need that, but especially people who are creating things, their work just does not revolve around, okay, I've got to go to these meetings and I've got to answer these emails. There's so much time they have to spend generating. And so they need the time to do that. So as much as you can help protect that for them, and even the designers to kind of realize that and do the things they can do and ask for that and ask for help protecting that time, that makes a huge difference.
I love all of those ideas. And when you were talking about even it helps you put up laundry, I was thinking about every time I have to do a presentation, I just am like, okay, well, I'm going to open up Canva and I'm going to start a blank presentation and I'm just going to start dumping some ideas in and and then pretty soon it's like, oh, well, I have this whole section done and I'm going to move on and do something else for now, but at least I've accomplished something.
Yep.
And even like to your point, like saving the file in the right spot, that has to be done at some point, right? You might as well get that part out of the way when you're feeling creatively blocked. Are there any resources that you use to look at? Like I often go to Behance or like Pinterest and search for stuff, but are there any other resources you use to kind of get inspiration?
No, I mean, those are both some good ones. So there's also like sometimes just looking at like good photos that may or may not have to do anything, not necessarily photos you're going to use can work. So like sites that have like any stock photo site that you can just look at things could help. But you can look at things like Unsplash that have like free photos just to give you like inspiration of just different types of things. But even, yeah, like I said, even just an image search can help you see, oh, good examples, bad examples. It could do just the smallest thing to kind of get you there. So it doesn't take anything fancy.
Right, right. I mean, I think there's inspiration all around us and for everything, right? If you're working on a website project, even go and look at your favorite consumer website or your favorite product website and get inspiration from that. I mean, higher ed has a tendency to kind of have chaotic websites that are not always the best in the world. So look outside of the industry. For viewbook ideas, you don't have to look at viewbooks. You could look at the IKEA catalog. You could look at the REI catalog, get inspired by other things.
Yes, I love that. Yes, looking definitely outside of higher ed. I actually like to look at higher ed last. If we want to get like inspiration, I kind of hold that back because we tend to want to judge and be like, well, this is going to be better than everyone else's. But don't let that be your bar. Don't let the other universities in the state be your bar. So, kind of do your own homework and then come back. And if you go, oh, we could be doing a lot better, they have really good ideas, then use that as a launch pad. But yeah, don't kind of short circuit your creativity too quickly.
I love that. That's fantastic advice. I'm curious about if you think that there is any particular challenges for designers working in higher ed versus other industries.
Mm. I think that there's always this tension, no matter where the designer sits in the organization, between brand standards, maybe you call them graphic standards, identity standards, whatever those are, your colors, your logo, however detailed they are for your institution, there's always a tension between those and what maybe the person who's initiating project or like a campus department wants.
Mm-hmm.
And I think navigating that is a very unique thing in that if you work inside the institution, these rules are for inside the institution, but also someone else from inside the institution is pressuring you to do it a different way. That's kind of a unique challenge that we find ourselves in that is can be difficult to navigate because sometimes it gets contentious. So I would encourage, the leaders to step in, especially if it's contentious and kind of help manage some of those conversations and not just leave all of that on the designers to kind of sort through.
That's an excellent point. I often think about like Target, the designers in different departments at Target are not producing stuff outside of the Target brand standards. Everything is within the Target brand standards. Departments don't get to decide, no, we're going to use blue instead of red, or we're going to whatever. And it's like higher ed has this unique perspective of much more creative autonomy in departments than I think outside of higher ed has.
Exactly. I think about that too all the time. I'm like, oh, they're not fighting about this. And yet here we are. You can get through it. It just takes some conversations and understanding and figuring it out.
For sure. What would be the biggest piece of advice that you have that you would give to marketing leaders about getting the most out of their partnerships with designers?
If I could only give them one piece of advice, if they've heard nothing else, I would say make sure that the designers understand the strategy and the desired outcomes driving the project. Treat them as collaborators and invite their input early in the process.
I think that's fabulous advice to have your designer at the very kickoff of a project so that they have all the information everybody else on the project has, and having them work with the writer. If the writer's writing copy, and they can't just hand that copy off to the designer. Now the designer has to fit it into a design. It should be a conversation, a flow of this is what I'm thinking for the copy. This is what the layout might look like. This is how we can make the visuals play well with the copy. Where are the calls to action going to be? How are we going to highlight those? All of that kind of stuff. It shouldn't just be like a assembly line to create a project where it's like, here's the strategy that's handed off to a writer. Here's the content that's handed off to the designer. The designer creates the design and you have a finished product. That's the surest way to have not good stuff, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes,
Painful.
I'm constantly saying it's not a factory as much as we want it to be because that would be easier if it were a very linear process, but it's not. It's not a factory. You can do it that way, but you're not going to get the best end result in that. And you're going to have a lot of gaps in the handoff. So as much as, no one wants to drop the baton, you're going to drop some things in that, just kind of doing that. And so maybe the copy doesn't fit quite right and the designer doesn't, if they don't have access to the person writing it to say, oh, maybe what if we change this word to this? What if we did this? What if we made this like this? Then they're just going to do their best to make it fit, squeeze it in. And you're missing a lot of opportunities when you operate that way. Absolutely.
Even like, hey, can you cut 5 words out of this? Having the partnership where the writer is making the decisions about what words to cut versus the designer having to say, okay, I think these words are less important or whatever. Let people play to their strengths. Let the writer make the decisions about what words to cut from it. Let the designer make the decisions about the look and feel, but do it in a really collaborative way. I think I'm thinking about at a previous institution, I'm not going to say which one. When I got there, the designers, it was that assembly line approach, and the designers had such little morale. They felt like they were just automatons doing what they were told to do. They always were the caboose on the project, right? It was the end. Every missed deadline led up to them still having to hit theirs with less time. And I see you're laughing because I bet you've experienced that.
Yes.
And it was like, it's so bad for morale. And culture is really a mirror of leadership. Like leaders really need to lead that collaboration or it's not going to happen. Like it's because it is easier to work in a silo than it is to work in a collaborative way, but it's not as good and it's not as enjoyable and it's not as impactful. So yeah, get out of the silos, work across the team.
Sometimes we need to bust some silos right there in our own creative teams.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. Is there anything else that you want to share about working with creatives?
I think that bringing them in early, that was a great point. So yeah, that's it. Do that. Don't be scared. They're communicators too. So treat them just like you would any other communicator.
I love it. Well, Brittney, where can people find you if they want to connect?
You can find me over on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. So yeah, that's the best place to reach me.
Awesome. And listeners, as always, you can find me on LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt. You can also find me on Blue Sky at Higher Ed CMO and on my website, solvehighered.com. Please feel free to reach out at any time. And I hope this episode has inspired you to go bust some silos. Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry best as your hosts. Learn from Mallory Wilsey, Seth Odell, Jenny Lee Fowler, Eddie Francis, and so many other of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.